Know Thyself is dedicated to the exploration of the most rewarding task an individual can ever embark on, the journey to find oneself. Our intention is to investigate the universal principles that have equipped our species to seek the treasure of all treasures, self-knowledge. With your host, Daniel Powinski and Eduardo Manteca, this is the Know Thyself podcast. All right, welcome to the Know Thyself podcast. I am Eduardo Manteca, and I'm here with Daniel Powinski.
Hello.
And today we continue with the, I shouldn't say the planets, but I guess astrological breakdowns.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, so the moon. I'm very excited to talk about the moon today. There's so many, there's just a plethora of information on like what to look up on the moon and what to like really kind of sort of use for guidance. But, you know, the moon, as we've all known, has a direct effect on our emotions, right? And so with this episode, we'll be able to we will be able to answer a lot of questions as to why it affects our emotions and what it's been thought of in ancient times and what it's still thought of in our current time. And again, I'm just doing a terrible job at this introduction, but I guess I just like have so many questions. So let's start with breaking down the moon, though, Daniel.
Okay, yeah.
And
No, man, but you brought up a really strong point about the moon being connected and representing emotions and the emotional nature of what it means to be conscious. So I think that's a really, really important component to kind of pull up right away and really kind of reflect on, because that is really a lot of the energy that we're going to be discussing today. So the moon is going to rule over emotions. It's going to rule over cycles, which is going to be really important. Mm-hmm. The home, that's going to be like the physical home, and also your like spiritual home that you create within yourself. So motherhood, okay, reflection, the element of water. And again, we've really started to kind of scratch the surface of the four elements and how they work. Actually, the five elements is really what we were talking about, because we were really talking about ether last week with the Jedi and the Force, right? Mm-hmm. So that's that fifth element. But we're really going to be looking at water today. And, you know, we've spoken about air, we've spoken about fire, and we've spoken about earth. And we're going to, in the future, really have a breakdown episode where we're really looking at those elements, because just within the study of the elements themselves, there's podcasts and podcasts and podcasts you can do, right? But the moon is just such a perfect reflection of water. And I mean, it really even rules water, like we're going to talk about physically. But a part of all those archetypes, the other archetype that the moon's really going to represent is that nourishing factor, the nourishing of yourself and the other people. It's that female receptive energy, and the female is very prominent in this one. And we really see those female energies and the expression of those female energies. Rhythm is going to be kind of represented in this. The inner world, so kind of our internal self, our subconscious, that shadow self is very much represented with the moon. And also the inner teachings of spirituality. Okay. Right. So, we really do take a look when we study spirituality. It's really the study of the sun's mysteries and the moon's mysteries. And a lot of the stuff we actually could discover in here, like these archetypal patterns and even the archetypal patterns of these planets, these are very much like a moon mystery. It's kind of what they kind of embody. And also, with motherhood, with cycles, it's really representative of the womb as well, the female womb that's going to, go through the cycles to create new life. And that's what the moon's all about. It's new life, the death, new life, the death. And it's that story of rebirth always keeps coming. And as we study spirituality, we really start to understand, just how important this rebirth is and how you go through more than just one death, which is your physical death. There's always death that are happening. New cycles are beginning, new cycles are ending.
Right.
And also, one of the big aspects is the relationship between the past and the present. Okay, now that's going to be something that's really important, because when you really start doing that work of the shadow self, really start doing that delve down into the subconscious, you really start to examine the patterns that formed before your conscious awakening, of course, but a lot of these patterns were formed in your early childhood that you don't actually have the physical memories to actually understand how these patterns were formed.
Right.
And being able to reflect on that. And again, the moon's all about reflection. And we're going to talk about why, by it imposing that idea of, and it just being an expression of that idea of reflection physically, of how it reflects the sun's light, we also have that power and that capacity to reflect. And we can go back and look at those past and reflect on how it influences the present. And then if there's something negative there's some kind of trauma there, we can work through it with those other planets, make a new connection, a new reflection, and then that pattern is rewritten to the betterment of ourself rather than the detriment of ourself.
Well said.
Right?
Well said. Well, I think we should start first with, one thing that you just said, sort of maybe go, okay, this is exactly what I've been reading about and wanting to know more in regards to the moon and its feminine energy.
Yes.
So, in multiple cultures, if not all, and you were saying it is Japan that sees the moon as a male and not a female.
Right.
But I want to go right into the moon and its moods, and then we can kind of start breaking down where that sacred feminine, as we were talking about, like that energy actually comes from, why it appears to be that way, and how the moon is the female energy.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Perfect start off, man, because that's exactly what we're talking about. And through most cultures, almost all cultures, the moon is always going to be reflected as a female. The only one being the abnormal would be Japan, but we can kind of go into that discussion because it really is that reflection of the each other in it. And that's a beautiful story. But when we really study the moon, we do, because the moon is such this receptive controller of cycles and that female energy. And, the moon not only represents that sacred feminine, but also that sacred mother energy. And one of the big aspects is, and again, we always kind of study these planets in duos, right? Remember, we studied Saturn and Jupiter, and it's really important to kind of understand those together. Mars and Venus, right, together. Mercury, we studied kind of with every planet because we just realized that that's that androgynous one that kind of moves around.
Right.
But now when we get to this aspect, we're going to study, when we study the moon, it's at the same time you're studying the sun. And these are going to be the two pairs. And these are going to play such a huge role in ancient mythology because these were the two biggest objects in our physical space, right? So like the reason why they had 7 planets in classical astrology is because these are the 7 planets that were visible to the naked eye, right? You can perceive Saturn. It's very small and you have to be very observant to understand that it's a planet. But through all this knowledge, they were able to do this. These two elements, the sun and the moon, were not very hidden, right? Everybody, any conscious individual has seen the sun. Every conscious individual has seen the moon. Even unconscious, you know what I mean? It's the biggest thing in our, right. It's the biggest visible thing we can see. So that moon has always kind of been that light in the darkness, to kind of help guide us. And one of the reasons why the moon has always had this reflective female energy and this nourishing energy about her and this caring energy is because of what it embodied and actually physically how it worked. So the sun's light is what reflects off of the moon. The moon does not produce any light itself, right? And in the study of spirituality, as we kind of really start to understand this, that the sun really represents that Christ consciousness, that Father energy. And it's blinding. You can't look directly into the sun very long to really meditate on the Creator, meditate on universal consciousness. Like it's just too powerful. So how you study the sun, which is the embodiment of universal creation in our reality, is by its reflection in the water or in the reflection off of the moon. So again, you study the sun through the reflection of the moon. And that's how you get to know the Father. You get to know the Father through your relationship with the Mother. And then we'll kind of get into, why certain energies at certain times create, when we talk about like the waning and the waxing. Mm-hmm. But that's really that big aspect that we really wanted to really look at. Because that's really what we're dealing with in that situation. You to perceive the Father, you perceive the Father through the mother, through that reflection, and that power to reflect, and that aspect of reflection that the moon represents, is what gives us that embodiment in ourselves to be able to reflect on that burning passion, Leo energy, sun, moon, that is just too powerful. Again, we'll physically go blind if you stare at the moon, but if you stare at its reflection in water, you can study it. You can really get to know it. And again, this is why the moon is so in charge of like meditation as well, because you're really reflecting on that universal consciousness light. Because it's the light of the universe. It will blind you, but through that process of reflection, through the mother, you can climb that ladder to get to the Father. Right.
No, well said.
So yeah, again, that's kind of why it's got the mother energy. And then the other one, when you were discussing about the moods.
Yeah, the moods.
Right.
And I know I was asking you about how the Earth rotates on its axis and how the moon is in charge of that, but how it affects like sort of the energy of the human.
Right.
That is here. And I know you've all heard, how it shifts the tides and how it changes, or it affects climate for us also just as much as the sun does. But I just kind of wanted to know how its direct reflection, as we're talking about here, has an effect on us with humans. I mean, I know that that's where you can find the what the rooted word, for lunacy, right?
Oh,
or
right.
a lunatic individual.
Yeah,
Luna, right? Moon in Latin or in Spanish or in many other languages. But I don't want to get off really quick. I just want to know more about the mood, though.
No, absolutely, man. And you did a great job. Oh man, it's just so funny because the moon, you can get off topic so quickly because it just covers so much. Like right when you were saying that,
a lot.
I wanted this to like break out about so many different things, but I will try to stay focused. But yeah, you brought up the idea of moods, right? And again, this is the moon represents that emotional energy inside us. It represents that water. Okay. And we physically know, and again, this is how you can like always just kind of have astrology conversations with people, because they're very comfortable talking about, again, Mercury retrograde and the moon. Right. People who are going to tell you all day that astrology is not a thing will tell you that, oh, I work in the hospitals and full moons are crazy, or I'm a school teacher and full moons are a little crazy. Even when it rains out, it's a little crazy at schools, especially like in Arizona, because it doesn't rain very often. But you know it as a rainy day, you're like, the kids are just going to be, the emotion's going to be a little different. Like everything is going to be, the water's coming out.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So like, you're just like, don't sink the ship. But it is like teachers will talk about that, and they'll talk about these astrological aspects that happen, but the moon being full is something that you see and people get connected to. Also, really left brain science people love to tell you how the moon controls the tides, and how it's so amazing how the moon controls the tides. And then you're like, yeah, that's amazing. And then you're like, and we're like 3/4 to like 4/5 water, right? And they're like, yeah, that's amazing. And they're like, do you think it controls like our emotional tides? And they're like, no way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you don't even realize that we are made mostly of water. And if the moon has an effect on this huge body of water, it's almost arrogant to say it's not going to have an effect on our huge portion of water. Right. And again, this is really what the moon's going to represent, because it rules these emotions. And why the moon does this, and that energy that kind of creates, because it kind of controls that water within us. And this is why you can get boiled over, right? Because it's all about that water. I'm all steamed up, or, you always use water terms. And that's why you need to cool off. Like it's always considered with like how your internal water is, like stuff gets us boiled over, heated up.
Exactly.
Right. And we use these terms all the time, and we don't realize that they've got like an astrological base to them. But even just like the moons, so how the moon works is it's a very applicable occult power. Okay, because again, people perceive it already. So why this one is so useful into self-study is because you can really perceive that occult esoteric energy that we talk about, which is, again, it's just the bouncing off that electromagnetic energy that's created from the sun is bouncing off these planets and then reflecting back to us. And that's what changes that electromagnetic energy. So there's actually, again, this physical science about it, but that the moon is so close to us and we see its cycles so clearly, and we watch it go through the zodiac sign every 28 days, you can really, if you start focusing stuff, you can really start to understand understand the zodiac, you can understand the houses, everything in these 28-day cycles. And you really kind of start learning about it because it only takes a moon's in a new planet in 2.5 days, is in a new sign in 2.5 days. So it's always in this constant motion around us. So yeah, it's always, and it always takes on the energies of the sign that it's in, and it's very reflective and very receptive. So again, that it's so reflective and receptive, it really takes on the energy of these signs that it's in, and it really kind of pushes that energy out there. And this is why you have moods, because it's your moon going through these signs. It's where your birth chart moon is and how its connection with where the moon is currently. But this is why you go through all these different moods, and you go through, and that's why, again, it's moods is based off of moons. Okay. It's that emotional energy, and it's that experience and that filter that you're perceiving it through, whether it's Aquarius, Aries, right? Whether it's a full moon, whether it's waxing, whether it's waning, all these energies are going to make themselves present. So when you really start looking at self-study, the moon is a great cycle to be based off of. Okay. And that's why we based our months off of the moon. It's moons. It's really just the moons. And this is really what it used to be based on. And again, this is why they don't really base it. So they've almost like taken that away with us with the Gregorian calendar. Like that's why it's like 12 instead of 13. And it's not this like whole system where we could just kind of follow the moons all the time. They break that up, and they don't make sure that the calendar doesn't start because they don't want us to really see that pattern that's there. Right. But if you've ever spent time with a female, they internally know what this pattern is. They are so connected to this pattern. Again, I mean, it doesn't just represent female energy. It also represents like the female menstrual cycle, which is just the menstrual cycle. Okay. And females will always tell you, and they've told you since the beginning of time, like when men get really on their high britches about like how their new fake science that they are touting is so superior, but then the female will always be like, no, we have some kind of connection with the moon. Like I physically know that. And it's a physical thing, but it's also a spiritual thing. And it's just an aspect that is undeniable. Right. Right. And again, you brought up the word about lunacy and lunatic, and that is based off of the lunar energies, right? And then, this is why werewolves come out in the full moon, because it's that moon energy that's out there. And again, that moon energy can represent, it's got polarities. So it can represent that mothering, nurturing, caring energy, but that also can represent your negative dark side, that dark self that hasn't been washed with the love of universal consciousness. Okay. Because you travel to your dark self to accept it, and then you start to clean it and embody it. But there is a cleaning phase, because a lot of that stuff happened to you that might have been trauma. There might have been, preconceived notions. There could have been patterns that you formed when you were in anger and in fear. So when you find that shadow self, there is this process of kind of washing it, but that uncontrolled shadow self that's unreflective, that's what the werewolf was all about. That's the energies that you just push down during the day. And then when it's that full moon and that energy's at its highest, it takes over you and you become the beast. Again, like all those stories, like the Dracula and the werewolves, and those are all esoterically based. There's a deep psychological reason behind those stories. Like we know what energy vampires are, right? So it's, there's always like these deep meanings, but the moon is just all about that. And again, how it travels through, how it goes through that cycle so quickly, we get to perceive it in a very, very in your face, but also a very applicable matter. And learning how to work with the moon is so important to self-study. One of the things that we are really trying to kind of create here is the idea of proper manifestation in alignment with truth, right? That's kind of like our big thing. You line yourself with truth, and then you start manifesting what you need to do for the evolution of consciousness, right? The moon gives you that model to follow, the cycles of the moon. So we have this waxing period, the full moon, and the waning. And again, this is something that ceremonial magic, Wicca community is very strong on. Like Wicca magic, like you learn the planets and everything, but your main focus is the moon, because you know how powerful it is at creation. How powerful it is that it's the connection again to the eternal and external, right? It's the connection to the eternal and the eternal, right? It's forever and it's within. And it's, so, learning how to even work with the moon. So like when the moon's in that waxing stage, this is really where we're planting the seeds of what we want to manifest.
Right.
This is where you're really starting to get projects into motion and following that, and that project doesn't have to be a physical project. This could be a self project, this could be an internal study. And this is really what probably should be the focus of this stuff. And then you build that up to that full moon expression when you can really reflect on it, because again, on that full moon, we have that full reflection of that sun energy. So we can study the creative, we can study the universal consciousness and that impulse to live very, very clearly, because we're getting the most of that sun at that moment. And that's why it's all about, that's like when the manifestation really starts to take form. Right. And then the waning is really a reflection of that first process, how it went, the outcome of the situation. And also that's a great time to kind of push energy away from you. You're kind of pulling information and energy in that waxing. That waning is a good time to kind of banish stuff that doesn't serve the purpose of universal consciousness anymore. Right. But keeping within that cycle and not fighting that cycle, going with the ebb and the flow of the universe, and not, we always talk about going with the stream. This is what we're talking about. The water is ruled by the moon. Like when we're talking about going with the flow, that row boat your boat episode, understanding the patterns of the moon is so important. And I get off the stages, and I know when I'm off that stage, like it's just, you can let the moon's energy really kind of tell you what your emotional state is. It's because again, it changes the signs every 2.5 days. That's an easy thing to check in on every morning. Where is the moon? This is going to be a good understanding of kind of the reflective parameters of my emotions during this day. So maybe, if something like the moon's in Cancer, like maybe I need to, my reflection might be about my home or my own self, right? And it gives you a forecast of the energy that's present. It's not going to tell you what's going to happen, but this is the energy that's going to be present. How do I want to react? Do I want to build off of this, or do I want to destroy with this? Right. But again, it just gives, it's that first step to kind of start working with the planets. And then as you start working with the moon, you start to see, and you can start incorporating the other planets, and your knowledge just kind of expands. Yeah. Right.
No, it's good to understand how to navigate through the cycles and the recycles, much like death and birth.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's something that's very difficult to, I guess, sort of live and let go through. But it doesn't have to be just a physical death. It could be the death of something that was a pattern that wasn't serving you any more purpose, but learning how to let go of it, or learning how to go through its cycle is proper. And knowing how to navigate with those cycles will probably relieve you from, I would say, more difficult times, and like, again, learning about these cycles is key. And that's why the ancients would understand the cycle that came from this reflection, or understand like what was to come from, making sure that when it was in that full moon and power, something was done, about it ahead of time, rather than just like not really knowing what's to come and what to expect.
Absolutely, man. I think the, again, the moon being the representation of the womb, and how we're incubating our manifestations, and we create life through what we collect, through what we think, feel, and act. And we are this aspect of this creator. We are this master builder, and really just almost seeing its connection with that, and really starting to kind of see the process of yourself as this creator, and using it again through that parameters of the moon, because the moon just gives you that vehicle to understand this process. It rules all these cycles of creation, which is what we need to do, because we know that on the part of knowing thyself and going out against self-knowledge, we need to create a more holistic living experience for all life on earth, right? So we know that this creative energy is going to be something that we're called upon. And again, this creative energy can be used in the external world, and this creative energy can be used in the internal world, right? And it should always be using on the internal world, and we should always be, creating a stronger foundation, creating a stronger character, giving expression to that, and then also reflecting on who we've become and reflecting on our past. That's one of the big things when we talk about the moon. And so the moon represents memory, but it represents memory in almost an emotional aspect. Okay. So, other planets are going to kind of represent memory and kind of like a physical, but this is going to be like that emotional energy, energy that's been left over from the past, and kind of the imprint it has made on our subconscious. Okay, because the moon does represent the subconscious. And that's, again, why when we talk about the moon and it's like, oh man, we could talk about so many things, is because the subconscious just goes all the way down to the bottom, right? It gets you all the way back to that internal life. So you really could just take the study of the moon and just go so deep in what it actually represents. And, one of the things we're really going to do is we want to make like a membership page, but also we want to make like addendums to these videos. And I'm going to be really excited when we go into the moon, especially like the moon's connection with Pluto, because once you get outside of the 7 visible planets, we will talk about Neptune, we will talk about Pluto, but what those are, they're just kind of the higher expression of the planets. So Pluto is the higher expression of the moon. And when we start talking about that relationship, you can really start to see the womb of consciousness, where this is almost the womb that's in front of us now with our moon is almost the womb of the self, and kind of like the present, but it kind of gets deeper and deeper. But that's really what the moon represents. It's that connection to that subconscious and going in and really understanding that shadow self and incorporating that into you. And again, just that womb of life, that connection to the all-knowing and to the all-loving. And, even that trauma of birth that we go through, a researcher, Michael Cesarian, he'll go and he'll speak like 10 hours on the trauma, the occult trauma of birth, of being disconnected from that eternal source, being disconnected from your mother and pulled into this physical world to embody this experience of our soul, which is so important, but traumatizing, right? And just how comfortable that womb was. This is also why, I don't know if we've brought it up on the podcast before, but when you're trying to quiet somebody down, you go shh, shh, right? Or calm somebody down. And that's really to mimic the water, the sound of water in your mother's womb, that you listened to for 9 months in this most pleasant, you were one with the mother.
Right.
It's exactly what we're trying to do now. Like when we talk about the hero's journey, a lot of times the hero's journey is there to reconnect with the sacred feminine.
Yeah.
Right. So really like that trauma birth, you can really kind of start talking about how it's like your own personal, the fall of man. And then you climb back that ladder to get back into that internal source of the mother. But you do that through the light guiding of your father.
Right.
Right. But again, you can't steal directly into the light. So you reflect on that reflection that your mother gives you. And again, this is, just archetypally, like the mother is usually, for the son or the daughter, the easier one to love. And again, the mother doesn't have to be the female. The father could represent that female energy, like that mother energy, right? Archetypes don't have to be just raised. Like, again, we get to this like idea today of like gender and people get so upset, but like, that female energy could come from the father.
Exactly.
Right. And that could be but that's the energy that the child really connects with, that makes them feel safe and makes them feel at home. Right. And that father energy, it's still loving, but it's more like, you got to get your stuff done. It's that Leo energy. Like it's the day's up, the sun's risen. What are you doing? Like, come on, rise. Utilize the day. So that receptive comfort mother of that loving energy of the mother is just, it's so important to the psyche, and to that almost like that safehood of the individual.
Absolutely.
Right. And again, this is why the moon represents the home,
right?
And why it's such an important aspect. You need food, water, and shelter.
Right.
And it's such an important thing. And again, that moon also is going to represent not only physical security, but also the emotional security internally. Okay. And that's why you keep your physical home in order and you keep your internal home in order.
Right.
Because it's very important to keep that internal safeness. And again, this is, whatever happens in this world, if we really were true to this path, it doesn't matter what your fate is in the next couple seconds. You can always retreat back to that home and feel safe with that internal consciousness that is what pushes life.
Exactly.
It's that reflection in those time of need, especially with how crazy this world's getting.
Oh my gosh,
We
right.
don't know if we're going to be in that situation, but in that moment, we must go within and realize that, there is an internal love, there is an internal life. And
Yeah. I mean, that's why people become, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying, like, people just are so heavily guarded. So if you meet people that are heavily guarded, they're guarding that. Mm-hmm. That is what they're guarding. And some of them, whoever you are, I know have had it more difficult than others, but I know that, like, in the case for me, I'll just use me as an example. Like, I will be that mother energy when I have children. And I have a great relationship with my mother, but I'm also a Gemini. And that has a great effect with the mother's relationship to a son with regards to the moon. And so, but that's just something I know about myself, my relationship with that energy. But she allowed me to understand that sacred feminine at a very young age, which hasn't really left that special place inside. And so I know that once I have children, that'll be my way of aiding my wife with that female energy and that embodiment of, like, that sacred feminine that we're talking about here. Because if they say the sun is the counterpart to the moon, and the moon is what is giving us this kind of like the hemispheres of the brain, we were talking about that, just because, and I like that you brought up the gender roles here, but just because you are male or female, like, we're all still coming from the same, and that is the womb, which is only one, which is a female, and trying to get back to that is key, just like understanding the moon itself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. No, it's so true. And, when we kind of think about this moon energy and this womb and this female energy, and just how important that motherly energy is. Again, it can be represented from either sex, but, it's one of those energies, and the sacred feminine has really been in, there's been a war with the sacred feminine. There's been a war with the divine masculine. Like, they're trying to kill these archetypes because this is what makes us human. And, even just the touch of the sacred feminine, like an emotionally charged touch is one of the most powerful things in the world. It can transcend words. It can, somebody could be irate. They could be completely broken down, and they don't need to be said anything. They don't need anything but touch. Even a child, if a child doesn't get touched within the first 10 hours, it dies. Like, that's unreal. Like, the human touch is so forming the consciousness. Like, I really fear about, all the babies that were born through this whole little pandemic thing. I hope that they don't have any, like, what are the emotional, like, what are they going to be the consequences of them being 6 feet away from their parents almost at all time, and not even seeing their parents' full face, and them wearing a mask, and just like, we got to think about even these consequences. Like, what is the effect if we're talking about that trauma of childbirth can actually affect our subconscious? There's so much, all you are doing at that stage from that 0 to 3 and 0 to 5 is you are just forming your subconscious.
Right.
You are forming those patterns.
Well, that's what I mean by people who are heavily guarded. When you meet, and I'm not here to, speak, I'm not a psychologist here or a psychiatrist or anything with a degree that would allow me to make an assessment, but you can pick out people right away when they've had that disconnection that you're talking about at a very young age, because then once they're older, that is what you find when they're guarded.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, oh, it went badly with either mom or dad, but there's something around that, those formative years that when things were formatting were not really emotionally, I guess, available for that individual, which is really sad to see. But that's why I've always taken it upon myself to, when a kid looks inquisitive and looks at me at the store, one day when you see our faces, you'll see that, I just got this beard, and we've talked about, like, the Disney villain thing. But one of the things that I just remember a lot is children staring at my beard and my eyebrows, and at times I can look rather stoic, I suppose, or just look kind of like stern because people have asked me, "Are you okay?" But every time I see a kid, I just tap into my inner child right away and just give them like a genuine smile, and you can see just how quickly their guard is let down because they're like, "Oh, I can trust." I'm like, "Yeah, you can trust me." I was like, "I'm goofy as, I'm nothing whatever you think I am." But the same thing goes for the other way around. When like a child feels insecure and say gets lost in the store, there's nothing better than that warm touch of like an older female, especially who's like, probably should be retired out of working at this department store, but she just sees you lost and puts her hand on your back to be like, "We're going to find your mom." And you're like, "Yeah, we are.
Right.
We are, Helen."
Right.
Like,
right.
I'm so excited. And then you want to be even friends with her. Like you might be asking your parents, like, "Whatever happened to her?" They're like, "Let it go."
Did she
like
come to my birthday?
She just found you.
Yeah.
Exactly. And brought you to me. It was only moments. It's like, nah, it's not the Helen I remember.
Yeah.
But anyways, understanding those energies and where they come from is really what I'm saying. And I know that you were talking about mood and the moon, but I think it's important that we understand these roles that we all have to play and how we need to affect our surroundings by noticing when there's a lack of that, understanding. And I think that's something that's key with even just taking away from
you're talking like the sacred feminine energy.
Yeah. Like if you can step up, if you see a situation that you think is lacking that, then, I think it's important that you sort of take a step forward and just say, okay, like how can I embody this, say a sacred female, I'm a male, but I would embody like say whatever I learned within the love bestowed upon me from my mom or from my grandma or from, my wife, girlfriend, spouse. As a male, it's like, okay, like I need to like get down to this person's level and sort of understand what's going on and how to reassure them it's going to be okay. Versus like right now with this whole, culturally we're all just shifting so quickly, but I still see that, children, especially right now, are not really sure how to feel about it and not really sure like what to think. So if you see an opportunity, like a weak point where you could like fill that void in with, even just a gesture, like I said, a smile, if you can, even if you just raise your eyebrows a little bit or make some silly face, I think it goes a long way.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, I think that's, and again, we talk about applicable aspects of these archetypes and, we always try to do that, but this would be an applicable nature of using that female sacred feminine energy at a time that we really need it, because again, everybody's kind of so drunk with fear and fear's turned into a virtue and that whole aspect. But there was a great quote that I saw once that said, you be who you needed when you were younger.
Yes.
Be who you needed when you were younger. And I think that's so important, especially for us as we, are transitioning into this. And, you needed that individual that again, you thought was the Disney villain to smile at you and be like, "Oh wait, you're actually good."
Right.
Maybe it's this politician I shouldn't trust. And you're like, it's absolutely that politician you shouldn't trust. Right. But yeah, absolutely, man. It's like that whole thing. And again, this moon energy and like what it entails in this aspect of it, the moon has that connection to source and to spirit. And spirit sees you as spirit knows you can be.
Right.
Okay. So it's beyond this like ego with the lower E and this self with the lower S, right? Lowercase s, lowercase e. And it sees you and it perceives what you can be. Okay. So this is also why people's emotions can be torment to them, and they can always be an emotional turmoil. And this is really spirit trying to have you recognize that you are not who you need to be, and it will call you out. This is what the whole dark night of the soul is. It's that experience with the source and opening yourself up to it to understand that you need to go on improvement. Like what needs to be done. And it will do this. It's in my own personal life right now, I'm going through, intense emotional turmoil, and it's been like that. But it's because universal consciousness is like, you're not who you need to be yet. Like you still look at all, you need to go through these challenges. Right. I know what you can be, but it's not going to be by, these false claims that you're attaching yourself to. What are you going to liberate yourself from? What are you going to become? Are you going to fulfill your destiny? Because again, the angels can't make the moves for us, but they can kind of, again, they sit right on that verge of understanding, and just they just say awake, and that's that process of us actually perceiving what is trying to be guided and what is trying to be told to us. And so through this dark night of the soul, you really start to understand that this experience is not just logical. There's this emotional intelligence that's going to come with the evolution of our soul and the evolution of our character. And there's this internal definition that we need to go in and define about ourselves and really pull back up to that surface. Mm-hmm. Like when we were talking about that story of the pearl, right? Where does he have to go? He has to go deep down into the ocean to get that pearl. That's going deep down into your subconscious. And this is what that dark night of the soul is all about. And you will be stripped of all your physical things. Like you will get stripped of what you're attaching yourself to. Like this whole process is for you to become. Like that's why you separated from the womb. That's why you had to fall, was so you could actually be because you're the son of the king. You're going to go out and you're going to reconnect with what you are to travel back to the king, get back to that universal consciousness. And that's, again, always that journey. We talked about it, through the hero's journey. We talked about it last week with the Star Wars breakdown. We're all just in this process of walking each other back home. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what this whole thing's about. And you use this subconscious energy not only to go back and reflect on your past, but this is also your connection into the archetypal patterns that we've been studying. So like when George Lucas was constructing Star Wars and he's utilizing all these archetypes, it was not just a study of ancient religions, it was also an internal study of the self, because these are the patterns, the universal patterns that are imprinted on our subconscious. And this is, again, why we can dream the same symbols, right? We have these shared experiences, and how these stories pull up on all different cultures. It's because, again, there's an imprint and there's information that's internal to us that we actually can almost download. But it takes that balanced brain, it takes that firing neocortex, right. It takes that full understanding, and then it also takes the understanding of studying your intuition like a scientist. There's this energy of there's this great organization called the Brotherhood of Light, and they were around in the early they've been around forever, but they wrote these amazing books in the 1920s and 30s, and they talk about how you study your intuition, which is kind of like the information we're talking about, but you validate it just like you do with any other scientific thing. And you really start to try to identify the different feelings of your gut, right? Because I have a gut feeling. Well, is it a gut feeling that you're right or wrong? Like you even study what that internal feeling is, right. And you really just take that process even further. And again, we do that aspect, and you want to take the scientific approach into the subconscious, but there is very vast, important information to the understanding of yourself and the understanding of human consciousness that's buried deep within those patterns. And we have to go deep. We have to go internal. And the energy for doing that has to be true. So you have to be in alignment with truth, and you have to represent truth to get the deepest information, because the mother sees through the facade. She sees through your clever Mercury and how you're clever with your tongue. She sees how you're, that jovial energy that you're kind of trying to paint this thing with Jupiter. Like the moon and the mother just sees right through you. That's why, again, people can ask you, are you okay? And you're not really okay. And you're like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I think he's okay. But then your mom or that emotional sacred feminine ask you, even if it's just a older lady again at the line of the grocery store, are you okay, sir? Right. And you're like, yeah. And she's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. We're going to go have coffee together. And you're like, oh, I know. This is going to be great. But it is, man. It's receptive, but it's also so penetrating in the aspects of what it does to our internal selves.
Right.
And again, we just...
Well, I know that, we'll talk more about this a little later on, but I know relating back to patterns, but also something I think you brought up that I wanted to add into this is rhythms, right? These rhythms.
Yeah.
I know we're talking about these cycles and how they're really gonna come no matter what. So holding yourself or attaching yourself to these things that are just you know, very minor in time, are pointless, because it's like you're gonna, like you said, the moon, it will see through your facade. That mother energy will see right through what the agenda you think you need is, but in reality, like, you're gonna be tested along the way until your job is done to get back home, to get back to where we came from. But I feel like with these rhythms that you're talking about,
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about rhythm a little bit in that patterns and vibrations episode.
Yeah.
But again, that ebb and flow, getting into a rhythm of your life and understanding that there is a rhythm, there's a time for action,
Right.
and there's a time for rest. There's all those experiences are open for us. And what we do is we learn the rhythm and that flow of the moon so we can tap into those universal rhythms and patterns. And then we're working again and we're going with the stream. Right. So it's that proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah.
And it's going from, living in the effect to being a part of the cause. And that's again how we're gonna, create the world that we really want to create. It's never going to be living in the effect. It's going to be in that causality. Again, this is why they tell you that the moon's not important, because they have you living in the effect of the moon and they're controlling your moods. Even like when they put specials on TV,
right.
like it's in the moon is in a certain place. Like everything is by design astrologically by these social engineers. So, it's really just this free will decision to kind of make that move. But this is a great leap of faith because you jump into astrology by the study of the moon, and then everything will else kind of unfold. But the moon's a great one to start off with because you will see the effects of it instantaneously. Right. So it's so powerful. It's our mother. It's our womb, and it's the vehicle of how we create and experience our creation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. It's a great way to make a path. Like an example I have about that mother energy. It's what I always rely on because it's always been my greatest strength. And so anytime I've ever gained friends or anytime that I've had, someone who hasn't trusted me right away, it's kind of them apprehensive to understanding like, well, what side of the brain are you from right here? Are you more analytical? Are you more into this sort of like artistic and loving side? And I remember feeling that, especially because I'm a guy with other dudes where they were just kind of like, this is my alpha stance. This is what I can do. What can you do? You're next, go. And I'm like, oh, that's not where I'm going to aid you. But when you're at your lowest point,
right,
you will know, why I'm even here. Yeah. And one of the things that I was going to say in regards to that is, I just finished a project that I was filming for, and I had to meet a lot of people. I was very fortunate to actually have these encounters with individuals, and the best encounters I had were people who were 100% dedicated to their life's work and purpose. And that's how I feel. Like you could take my whole house away right now. It doesn't matter. Like I think the things that I have are so that I could better others right away, instantly, right now, not when I'm older, regretting that I can't, but right now. And physically I can do that. And with my heart, I can do that. And as you were just saying, it's up to us on how to create that path or understand those patterns. And in this case, with this guy that I'm about to mention, he owns, it's called the Sounds Academy. This guy is this really great guy named Kirk Johnson here in Phoenix, Arizona. But immediately we just got to talking because what he started was an organization for underfunded neighborhoods or neighborhoods of just lower income who don't have a means to learn music. And so all these children that come to him are basically learning how to play all kinds of instruments with all kinds of individuals, but also gaining trust as very little humans of older humans who are like, I'm just here to just show you like what your true potential is. Right. So immediately when him and I got to talking, I'm like, you're the man. But he felt where I was coming from. He's like, no, you're the man. I'm like, can I take this mask off? And he's like, oh yeah. And we took it off. And I was like, I could have just hugged the guy and like, we had a great time. But again, that was all the embodiment of this like sort of motherly energy. We're two males, but we're both talking about like how it's important to take care of the children, the future, and how we are the ones that are not necessarily in charge, but we are, meaning like, how are we going to create a world for those who, I guess, don't know that there's possibility exists. Those social engineers we talk about, they're one step ahead of us, but that doesn't mean that you're not in the race either. So, you should do whatever you can when you can to open up those like portals for others to sort of like enter that sort of trust, that bond, that connection that we have. And the connection is me, as for instance, as a male with that female energy.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's really what I was kind of trying to talk about in regards to that encounter with him. You know?
No, absolutely, man. And again, it's a great embodiment. And the idea that, again, we've talked about this before, but you embody both of these energies.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you are the embodiment of both of these energies, and you want to express both of these energies in a healthy, through the highest frequency kind of way. But yeah, man, the moon, the sacred feminine, so important. You know, and again, when we talk about like, we'll get into this later because that will go me down a whole different rabbit hole. But yeah, no, it's always a fascinating topic. And again, there's so much we want to cover in the future about this. Got some really kind of great episodes lined up in the near future, you know? So really that Star Wars, that was kind of like a part one. So we're going to kind of touch back on that. We're going to break down the actual movies. We did have a lot of requests for the Wizard of Oz from that Star Wars episode. So we will definitely be doing the Wizard of Oz because that is my ultimate favorite. But, you know, a lot of new stuff that we're going to kind of be presenting. You know, we kind of covered those Hermetic principles, but now we're really kind of going to get deep down into, you know, the study of the elements, the study of the Kabbalah, the study of the tarot and the Fool's Journey and how that relates back to us, and really kind of starting to study some of the other planets and just, there's so many occult, esoteric subjects out there. But now that we have this foundation and this common language, we'll be able to really transcend this subject and really be able to cover some really in-depth stuff. And again, please be on the lookout. We're really trying to create like a membership where we can have like small group settings and have discussions. We're really looking forward to that. We want to move to Costa Rica. We decided that today.
The Know Thyself School.
The Know Thyself School in Costa Rica will be the greatest. We will have so much fun there, and we'll drink out of coconuts at night and watch the sunset. We're going to love it. You're going to love it. Let's make that happen. Let's like make that happen.
I want to surf with like a full moon.
Oh, that would be the best.
Just do it all at once.
I'll just do it all. Be best friends with like a sea turtle.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's exactly. So let's all put that on our agenda for 2021. We're all going to go to Costa Rica. That would be great.
Absolutely.
But my man, always such a pleasure to share this space and time with you.
Always. Yeah, no, with that being said, and until next time.
Until next time.